Most people burn out chasing success. But what if fun is actually the secret key to sustainable growth? Welcome to today's conversation, where we challenge everything you thought you knew about happiness, success, and well-being. If you're a high performer, an ambitious entrepreneur, or just someone feeling stuck in that burnout cycle, this episode is for you. My guest is Dr. Mike Rucker, a behavioral scientist and the author of The Fun Habit. He's here to flip the script on toxic hustle culture and show us why fun isn't a distraction, it's a necessity. And by the end, you'll walk away with a fresh take on how your relationship with joy, leisure, and play could be the key to breaking through or holding you back. Let's unpack the science of fun and see how these small moments of joy build a foundation for real meaning and resilience. Something that people might not appreciate on the surface is the fact that you're a businessman. You had several entrepreneurial endeavors, and now the book that you've just written is on fun. And so I think people they're kind of confused here, Mike. So what led you to talk about fun?
So I was lucky enough to be a charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association. So when, Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi came forth, I guess it was really Seligman, he had his book, Authentic Happiness, coming out. But people have been following Csikszentmihalyi's work for a while. And I guess just to back up a little bit for folks that don't know what positive psych is, right? It's essentially a facet of psychology that was brought forth because we had all of these tools from psychology that could lead to betterment, but we weren't using them except for poor mental health up until about the turn of the millennium, right? And so what these folks did with a bunch of other folks like myself and academics and practitioners is we created this group to bring those forward, right? And so we're talking about gratitude and mindfulness and flow and these things that can help anyone, with regards to better mental hygiene. At the onset, because we hadn't talked about happiness at all yet, we talked about that a lot, right? And we were all like, hey, we want to help people be more happy and we want to help people thrive. What we didn't realize is paradoxically over-indexing on this idea of happiness, we were making some of the most unhappy people, right? So we've now come to find out that if we get people to sort of continually ruminate on their disposition or where do they fit with regards to the social structure, that's a constant thing, right? We now have a term for it, the hedonic treadmill that we use commonly. And this idea of always being positive, we call toxic positivity. But when the book was kind of coming forth, those ideas weren't front and center, right? But we were starting to learn it. And so how I started to look at fun was, okay, if happiness, it outside of the construct of just studying it and quantifying it is problematic. It's not like a great thing to talk about with regards to helping people move forward. What is, right? And so we now talk about mindfulness more broadly because we know it's good to be centered, but fun is really an ode to that you can also be joyful in the moment. And those moments, once we index them over time, are really what, creates the scaffolding for us to be able to navigate the bad times, right? And so, but we've kind of villainized fun, right? Especially here in North America on all sorts of different levels, right? With regards to just looking at fun as whimsical, right? Like, the influencers that we kind of, poke fun at that are clicking their heels on the beach, like that's what we market as fun, right? And so I'll work with people that are like, well, I'm not that, so I must be an unfun person, which is so unfortunate, right? Because with your background in psychology, the number one sort of vehicle for getting into a space you don't want to be is when maladaptive things bleed into your identity. So if you keep telling yourself day after day, well, fun is this, what I see on Instagram or, social media, and I'm not that, so I must be unfun, then you start to believe it, right? And so, one, we need that redefinition, but then two, more broadly, just with regards to leisure and access to time to enjoy things outside of work, we're so time poor when it comes to, where we are living in hustle culture. And so I'm not one to say like, we need to create all this space, so that you can go and, live your best life. But we, similar to sleep, right? Where it's like, if you're not sleeping 5 to 6 hours, or less than that rather, we need to figure out how to get you to at least 7 so that you can have a baseline, right? And because that creates the platform for living a good life. We're now finding the same with leisure. Like if you're living your whole 168 hours in a week and you're not enjoying any of that time, we're seeing that be a pretty straight line to the record levels of burnout we see across all vocations.
Did you just like solve the universe in 4 minutes? Man, that's brilliant because we touched on so many things. We touched on positive psychology. We touched on happiness. We talked about society. We talked about what impacts our perception of what fun actually is. It's so profound because really we're recognizing that our understanding or misunderstanding of fun and happiness oftentimes could be one of the reasons why we struggle to experience fun and achieve happiness. So let's actually start off with some of the biggest misconceptions we have around happiness, around joy, around fun, because I think there is a healthy dose of unlearning that needs to happen in order for us to fully appreciate this.
Yeah, to start with the biggest one, like the biggest light bulb as I was putting the book together, is this idea that it is part of the fabric of living not just an enjoyable life, but one of purpose and productivity, right? And so the big scientific concept behind this is called the hedonic flexibility principle. The landmark study that I cite in the book was really well done. MIT, Harvard, and Stanford, 28,000 participants. And they went to go out and answer that age-old philosophical question, are we truly always seeking pleasure or trying to avoid pain, right? And so it should be no surprise that the folks that were in painful situations, right, like just burnt out, not finding joy in life, they sought out poor forms of escapism, right? These are the folks that like spend way too much time on social media, displacing that discomfort of a boring day or, whatever frustration they have. You see things like alcohol use and, just things that aren't keeping you in a state that you feel good about. But the surprising finding there was folks that were integrating joy and fun in their life by deliberate design. So not necessarily going out and doing all of these, fanciful things, but finding pockets of joy within their day to day. Once they found that their fun cup was filled, they were the ones that sought bigger challenges. These were the folks that wanted to go seek out growth. They didn't go and seek out just further pleasure, right? They weren't going to Burning Man every other weekend. They were like, okay, I'm good. I've got the resilience now and the base. Like, I don't want to have any more fun. I want to go now and grow. And so in that regard, living a joyful life, creates this platform for not only growing, but figuring out who you are, right?
Wow, that's fascinating, and I think it's very counterintuitive, especially when you think about the just we're rooted here the Western mentality around work ethic, where it's like, hey, listen, I got to get my work done, then I can have fun. Fun is always an afterthought, but really what we're seeing here in the research that you're citing is that fun really is foundational to the type of life that we want to live.
Yeah, because if you think about it, right, I think like once we start to slice it, it becomes more intuitive, but you're exactly right, right? Like, and the problem is like similar, and sometimes this analogy works, sometimes it doesn't, but, folks that are familiar with obesity research understand like the like McKinsey did a big study on it, right? And it's the problem is multifaceted. It's not plate size. It's not, urban design and like we walk less. Like it's complicated. And for any one person, it's going to be a subset of those things. Right. And so the same with regards to this, fun starved sort of epidemic that we see. Like everyone is going to have different reasons, but there are a host of commonalities. So one is, right, that Puritan work ethic, right? Like some folks have been raised under this paradigm that somehow if they're enjoying themselves, that's a quote unquote guilty pleasure, right? And so you should feel bad about the fact that you went out with your friends because, wow, you could have been being productive, and productive is virtuous, right? And then the paradox there is, and I'll get back on track, but that we know that the folks that have those constraints so that they save their energy and understand when to be productive and when to finally recharge their batteries, ironically produce more, right? So it's like, yeah, you work 60 hours a week, but you're so ground down, you're only producing one widget, right? Where if you're working 40 hours, but preserving that energy, so during those 40 hours, you can produce two widgets, as a very basic math example of this, that person working 40 hours is creating 80 units of productivity versus the 60, the guy that's like, well, I'm grinding out. I'm a workaholic. Well, bro, but you're not producing anything, And so that's one thing that needs to get course corrected. The other is just access, right? Like we don't have very much access. And so the US is the second worst in the developed world for giving access to leisure with regards to PTO, to 10 days worth of work for 1 year's, 10 days off for 1 year's worth of work. The one country below us is Micronesia at 9 on average, right? But we don't have much control over that, right? Like that's a problem that needs to be fixed at the top. I think what's more profound about those stats is we value it so little that in any given year, only 50% of us even take any of that. 1 out of 2 employees don't take any time off in a year. And so I get that that's somewhat rooted in privilege, but it's something that we need to examine because we know that that's also another thing that leads to burnout. And then I would say like the third biggest phenomena, and like I said, there's still a laundry list here, right? But the third is this idea of the sandwich generation. And that is that, fortunately, our parents are living longer than they ever have. And we're having kids later than we've ever had in any modern society, right? And so for the first time ever, our parents can't help us raise our children. In fact, we're taking care of our parents too. So we find ourselves, in this time deficit. But because of that, we need to have these measures that protect us because we're having to work harder than we ever have. And so the irony there is, again, to be able to show up as the best version of yourself, you have to have something left to give, right? And so being able to find these moments, even if it's just a few hours here and there, becomes so important so that you do have the capacity to, give some energy out. I like to think about it as, we're always in perpetual motion, right? And so are you in this downward spiral where you're grinding out and,
Wow.
you don't have anything to give the next day? Or are you preserving enough energy that you are, in this accretive state where you're building an upward spiral? So each day is building on itself. And again, ironically, the folks that can design a life where they're in that upward spiral are some of the most productive people. And some of these folks that I studied for the book are like, big high achievers. We're not just talking about, again, folks that, are living the nomadic lifestyle and have dialed it in, the Tim Ferriss 4 hours, work week. Even he will admit that was just something to sell books, right? The 4 hour work week's a myth. So where is that blend, right? So that you're finding joy in the things that you do. You're also enjoying your loved ones, right? Because we know that lack of connection is another piece that's definitely on the list, right? The Good Life, which is Robert's great book, that 50-year Harvard study that showed that loneliness is another key component to all of this. And I would argue and posit that fun is a nice salve to, fix that problem, because when you're looking for those opportunities to connect with others, fun generally is that thing that before we hit record, we were talking about your wonderful Thanksgiving, right? That was, an invitation to go enjoy your loved ones. But so many of us forsake that. And we're like, okay, we'll get to it during Christmas, instead of trying to figure out how can we create these micro moments, within the year, which are much more important than those big events that we kind of save for temporal landmarks.
Mm. This is brilliant, because to that point, I think a lot of times we can convince ourselves that we always have more time for fun. And then think about COVID years. I remember so many times people were like, oh, I'll go hit this trip next year. I'll do it next year. And then, wow, the whole world is shut down, right? You never know what's going to happen. But it's a lie that we often tell ourselves to deprive ourselves from that which is essential, And I wonder, too, when it comes down to this, we have Rene Girard with Mimetic Desire. A lot of times the people that are most aspirational when it comes to the business world, or whether or not it's like sports or whatever, we often idolize the people who are the working the hardest. Is we idolize the hard work and the process even more than the outcome itself. And that obviously hard work has its place, but then sometimes you get into this place where you vilify yourself for for resting. I remember just realizing that, like, one of the breakthroughs I had in when it comes to being present with my family was that there was an underlying belief that any time not spent working was unproductive.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, family time is unproductive. And I kept on thinking about work like I should do this. So when we think about this, before we even get to the things that we've already been talking about, which are the actual interventions, I'd like to explore a little bit deeper the beliefs that hold us back. Because it seems like today in the business world, there is a lot of status that is given to people based exclusively on how maladaptive their work-life balance is.
Yeah. So there are a few things to unpack there, right? With regards to Renee's work, I think what we point to is survivorship bias, right? And so we tend to celebrate the survivors. And yet, if you look at any of this data in mass, right, then there's so many casualties along the way, and people don't understand the price they pay for these kind of accolades, right? And so generally, if you have a pragmatic discussion of like, okay, you can have this, but these are all the things that it's going to cost you, most reasonable people would never pay that toll. Yet we don't talk about the cost for that level of success, right? And so, you have, like, I don't want to pick somebody out, but like Tom Brady's an interesting example, right? Like, yeah, he knew the cost. So are you Tom Brady? Like, do you want to give up your lovely wife? Do you want kids that probably don't like you that much so that you can have this thing? Maybe you are, right? So I never like to villainize that, because my mentor is Michael Gervais. He works with these peak performers, and he'd be the first to admit too, like, some folks are willing to give it all up, right? Because they want that thing. And so if you're so focused, that's what you want to do, then great, right? And so I'm only adding that as a classification. What I'm saying is that most of us do want a well-rounded life. If you look at like the work of Bronnie Ware, and now there's been a couple other, studies that have from palliative care folks that have replicated her work, these regrets of folks, when they're in their 60s and 70s that have given it all away and now wish they could get it back. You brought up the construct of time, right? It's the only resource that we can't get more of. And yet we're willing to give so much away. And so what's the underpinning, so that I actually answer your question? I think there, you could fall back onto Alan Watts's work and this idea that, especially in North America, we've been raised, since kids through this lens of meritocracy. And is meritocracy bad? Not really. I mean, it provides that carrot to get us to the next level. It gamifies our success to some degree so that we follow, the paths of others and look for mentorship so that we can level up. But at some point, I would posit that you need to get out of this, where do I fit in rat race, right? And generally some point, in your 30s or 40s, and figure out where do you fit, excuse me, get out of this mindset of where do you rank. Sorry, I misspoke. And figure out where do you fit. And so I think more eloquently, how can I get myself into this we situation instead of this me situation? Because what we know is that when we're thinking about how can I strive and how can I rank within the social fabric, right? It can be good fuel, especially when you have a ton of energy and you don't have, a family you need to support, and you're willing to make some sacrifices to get you to a certain level. But at some point, you want to start to figure out, how can I feel a level of contentment? And that really is, how do I fit into this life? And how can I create relationships and partnerships with the things that I enjoy and the people that I enjoy? Because once you do that, then you start to feel part of a bigger collective, right? And the benefits of that are insurmountable. But the big ones, I stole this from Lisa Feldman Barrett, is as soon as you feel smaller because you're a part of something bigger, all of your problems seem smaller too, right? When it's just you and you striving, any problem is just on your shoulders, right? that's why we see also like a lot of these measures that we talk about, and you probably remember some of this research. Um, the upside of living in an individualistic society is when we get these big wins, they're ours, right? Like I just won the race, like I got this prize. And so, there's a lot of excitement around that. But when the slings and arrows naturally come at us, they're ours to hold, right? And that's what's tearing us down. Where in more collective societies where families celebrate the win, yeah, it might not be as exciting because you need to share some of that. But when the bad stuff happens, you have folks to carry you with you, and so there's pros and cons to that. But we can go back to meritocracy being one of the main levers. This idea that you constantly have to strive to get to the next level, and that doesn't end until you retire. And unfortunately here now, right, like with the way the state of the social fabric, they're saying 67 is that age, and probably for my kids it's going to be even older. I mean, that there's not a lot of fun things you can do in your 70s. So figuring out how can you create micro moments for you to enjoy some of life, whether that's a sojourn, a sabbatical, or at its most extreme. I bring this up, I was giving a keynote, and someone came up because we're talking about time poverty, and she's like, you're right, here I'm part of the sandwich generation. I can't take holidays anymore, but I figure out how I can take hours. And so I make sure that my lunch break is something that lights me up each time, and in line with the hedonic flexibility principle. And not just her story, but a bunch of social science, the folks that do even just take breaks midday to enjoy something outside of work show up the second half of work a lot more productive. So it's true at a macro level, and it's true at a micro level that folks that just find these moments to at least do something that fills them up are the ones that can tackle things. And we haven't even got into the fact that if you're doing information work, it also enables you a better capacity to think in a non-linear fashion, right? And I think most people intuitively understand that too. When we're depleted, right, whether that's sleep or because we're burnt out, all you want to do is use your heuristics and algorithms to get through the day. You're not thinking about like, how can I pull information from a separate domain, to solve this problem in a creative way? I just want to solve it now so I can go to bed.
Here's a quick warning for everyone listening. Scams and identity theft usually don't start with some genius hacker. Most of the time, it's just because your personal data is so easy to find online. I'm talking about people search sites, shady directories, and places where anyone can pull up your address, phone number, and even your relatives' info. And then they use that leverage to impersonate you or target your family, and that's how these scams usually work. That's why I've been using Incogni. Instead of you spending hundreds of hours manually trying to opt out of these sites yourself, Incogni just automates the whole thing. They act as your proxy, taking down your data and demanding its removal from databases you've probably never heard of. And the thing is, this isn't just a one-time fix. Data has a way of popping back up, so Incogni continuously monitors these sites in the background to make sure your information stays deleted. I personally recommend the Family Unlimited plan. It's the best way for you to cover your entire household. It includes custom removals, so if you ever find a specific page exposing your family's info, you just send Incogni the link, and their privacy experts handle the manual takedown for you. You can get your data back risk-free with Incogni's 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you use the code ANYTHING at incogni.com/anything, you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Again, that's incogni.com/anything. Code ANYTHING. Are you ready to take your business marketing to the next level? Meet Brevo, the all-in-one CRM platform to help you connect with customers, boost engagement, and grow your business smarter. With Brevo, you can manage all of your customer interactions in one place, nurture leads with their built-in CRM, reach your audience through email and SMS, and keep them coming back with powerful automations. But here's where it gets really exciting. Meet Aura, Brevo's AI assistant. Aura helps you to craft smarter campaigns by suggesting personalized content, optimizing send times, and even analyzing performance data to help you improve your strategy in real time. It's like having a marketing expert on your team 24/7. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics, seamless integrations, and AI-driven personalization. Everything that you need to create multi-channel campaigns that hit the mark every time. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics. Get started for free today. Use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. Just head to www.brevo.com/anything and take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura.
There are some maybe startups or many enterprises, and I don't want to mention anyone, but some of them, they like buy ping pong tables or many things for people to enjoy, but at the end of the day they put so many goals that and people end up like working and not using all these fancy things that they have. So do they really believe in that, or they just do it because they should do it?
No, we have, like all academics, right? We have to give everything our silly name so we can put our TM on it, but we call that forced fun now. And man, the research there is really fun to read. So there's kind of this overarching thought that those were always tools to keep people within the workplace. So yeah, they might be like little respites, but the reason that the ping pong table is, in the cafeteria or in a room on the corporate campus is because they don't want you to go home, right? That they're hoping you can take your little break and then get back and work a little bit later. So, silly sock days, ping pong tables. It's now turned into a meme, which I love, right? Like, oh, of course I don't want my bonus. I want your pizza party. That one's my favorite. But so, but the studies that I love the most, and there's a few of them, is this idea that, leaders especially need to hear this, right? Is that what is fun to you is generally not fun to the employee. Like anyone that understands social determination theory knows this, because autonomy is like, there's a reason that that's number one out of the three. And so like, if you're a leader and you're like, I'm going to take my, subordinate out to a fun lunch, that subordinate's not having fun. They're still wearing their work mask. And their understanding is that this is something they're obligated to do. So to answer your question, if you're trying to create a fun environment at work, you want to figure out how can you add elements of autonomy in there so that someone can actually choose what they want to do instead of prescribing what you think, Fun Friday is going to look like. And so that's why you see a lot of, forward-thinking companies actually, create half-day Fridays so that that person can choose, the second half of their Friday, what they're going to do for fun, because they have given you all they can, Monday through Thursday.
That's really smart. That makes a lot of sense. And I want to talk about time a little bit more too, because one of the things I started doing as the leader of A&I is thinking kind of like a general manager of a sports franchise. And I realized there's some people out here who just don't take breaks, Simone. And so like there were several times with multiple employees where I'm like, no, we're scheduling a meeting. Great. And now you have a deliverable by the end of the week. You tell me when you're taking vacation time. I don't want you to do anything like work related, and I cannot tell you what to do outside of work, but I hope that you do something for yourself, because a lot of times you just take that time to just catch up on tasks and whatnot. But I think it's just important for people to take the time, but they feel guilty taking the time, because the reality is in a lot of corporate spaces, it's kind of like a trap. Oh, you do have vacation. You're taking vacation. Interesting. Okay, take your vacation. It's like, whoa, did I just fall for a trap here? So I think something that would be interesting to explore is how people can negotiate for more time, because I know people are intuitively understanding this, and I also understand that there's an imbalance between the reality and objectivity of the time and the emotional weight we put behind time too. So how can we start to find those pockets of peace and create more time that we can utilize for fun?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think often times folks do forget that they can also negotiate their PTO. And so it's not going to work every time, of course, but I have several success stories where, they got their, the first round of their package, and they had the forethought to be like, wait a second, I'm losing out. Most of the times it's because they saw the loss, unfortunately, but you know, as a cue to remember that that is part of your package. So if that's something that's important to you, and it should be, we've just gotten into why it should be, ask if that, you have that possibility. And then the other is, in line with your question, is do you have the ability to take a sabbatical or a sojourn? I think that's another thing that folks often don't realize, that if you can create a pitch that makes sense to whoever you're serving, oftentimes like taking a month off will allow you to come back and do so much better, right? Even for my book, I was working for an amazing company, Active Wellness, when it first came out, and I said, hey, this is very important to me. I would like 2 months so I can do this in an enjoyable way in line with the brand, right? And at first, they wanted to understand it. So it did truly become a negotiation to make sure that, like, I wasn't leaving them in an exposed position. But so I created that ability, by design and negotiating through it, so that I could create a sabbatical that would allow me, the privilege for coming back right where I left off. And so, is PTO negotiable? Absolutely. Work from home is getting harder, and that's a complex issue, and there's interesting research on each side. That would be a whole podcast on itself. But then also I think the sabbatical is the biggest one that we often don't talk about, right? That most people would have that after the 5-year mark. And there's been some really good research on that, with regards to the benefits of it, how it's generally more accessible than most people would think. They're usually getting their own way, right? Like, oh, there's no way. Or they think like I'm replaceable, which is unfortunate as well. But if you negotiate it and set the stage, right? And what an amazing tool, especially, you're a parent, I'm a parent, like that sweet spot of, when the kids are between 9 and 13. So they're going to remember that big trip to Europe that you might only be able to afford once in a lifetime, right? And you take it and you honestly do it instead of trying to, jam 6 weeks into a 1 week, spread. You strategically figure out when is that right thing, and you create these core memories, with folks that might go sideways if you only had 5 days because, Rome happened to rain that whole time, because of bad luck or whatever it is.
Beautiful. No, you're absolutely right. And I think it's important for us to have that reminder, the fact that we can do this, because I don't want people to listen to this episode and think it's just a merely entertaining intellectual exercise, where it'll be like, oh, hypothetically, it would be great if I had time to have fun. Well, on to work. No, you can actually do something about this. And I like how we've progressed through this, where we're talking initially about what fun and happiness, what those things are really, but then also what gets in the way of us even being willing to drive toward that. And now, how do we negotiate for more of it?
You did remind me of one other thing I want to make sure I touch on, though.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
It's not necessarily asking for more time, but one of the most powerful tools that I found is the transition ritual outside of work. And so there's been really good research, even companies that historically grind folks out, like consulting companies. I think one of the bigger pieces of research was done with Boston Consulting Group, if I'm not mistaken. And that is like, how do you preserve time outside of work? So like, whether that's no meeting days, or it's at 6 p.m. I'm not answering emails because this is time preserved for my family, right? And so what does that ritual look like for you, that cognitively your work is done? And, even if it's only that 3 hours, 7 p.m. when you get home to 10, like work isn't going to creep in there. Because what we do know is if you're on your phone, like if you allow notifications to interrupt time with your wife, that's work time. It's not family time. And people trick themselves. Right? They're like, well, I was here. You weren't here. You weren't present, and we know you're just chewing on that work problem. You never left work. And some folks will chew on that work problem until their head hits the pillow. And what's the first thing you reach for when you wake up? Especially if it's your alarm, right? And I'm not here to villainize phones. I'm just saying that, you put behavioral friction in those things, and all of a sudden it gets better. And 9 times out of 10, it has no consequence. We make believe, we catastrophize these I might miss that important email, from 8 to 10. Like, you're not. It's just been proven you're not. There might be that one time. It's like hoarders, right? Or it's like, no, you need to throw all this away, and like one thing that you might have wanted, right, gets thrown away. But the upside was you threw away all that other stuff, and so the risk reward paradigm was so in your favor, and yet you perseverate on that one thing that you lost. It's the same thing. With being able to turn down, like, it's just never a problem. And yet we make up these things like, oh, but I might miss out on something. So if you can create a ritual where you're like, nope, this is a social contract with myself, I'm shut down, then you really are able to preserve that time. And then you get to dictate it, right? Maybe you don't have agency over your time when you're at work because it's a challenging job. My doctoral work was with physicians primarily. They don't have a lot of choice, especially OR physicians, right? But they do have some liberty with regards to what we call pajama time, because the physicians that really do feel a level of service to their work will get caught in that loop. And at pajama time, so when you're answering ERM messages, when you're sitting in your bed and you really should be going to sleep, using physicians as an example, since I brought it up, what we know is if they continue down that path, they lose empathy for their patients, and a lack of empathy for your patients has a direct correlation to patient outcomes. So they're not just doing a disservice to themselves, because eventually they're going to want to leave the vocation. They're actually, if why they got into this job in the first place was to help out patients, they're actually eroding that capability as well through this weird lens that they think they're doing their job better by just trying to finish out the day, right?
Yeah, this is interesting because we've talked about fun and happiness in terms of an achievement. Sometimes we can think about it that way. Let me phrase it this way. A lot of times people think about that as an achievement, like an end state, but we don't talk about how the lack of those things fundamentally change who we are, right? Because we are the collection of our repeated activities, but we often don't think about how those repeated activities change and shape the way our brain works and operates through neuroplasticity. So really what we're seeing is that we, through these decisions, even though they might come from some level of valor or a good place, we might say, okay, well, I'm going to beat myself up to get this work done all the time. But then in the process, we're turning ourselves into a person that we ultimately don't want to become. And so it's not just about the feeling, it's also about our identity.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we touched on that a little bit already, but if it seeps into your identity, it's so insidious and it becomes much harder to then unanchor, right? So the identity is a big thing. If you start to believe like that life is just joyless, or somehow it's your fault, which is even worse, right? And folks that are stuck in these vocations where like, again, this comparison trap, like they'll see someone that can do it, and maybe because their circumstance is completely different, the dedicated father who's comparing themselves to an internist that like still has the vigor and vitality only because they don't have kids yet, or whatever it is, right? And that's the poor example, but you know where I'm going with this, that everyone's life circumstance is different, and yet we're going to compare ourselves to others, not knowing, only seeing kind of the curated life that they've decided to show us, because we generally don't see their challenges. So that's one piece. And then the other is that I just want to touch on is, as adults, it's really comfortable to get into those grooves, right? I mean, we do rely on heuristics and patterns because when we can put ourselves in autopilot, it becomes a little bit easier. But there are multiple consequences to that, right? There's certainly upside because we know what's coming next. But the consequence is we stop dilating time. So we can get really quickly, we can get into this trap of time feeling like it's passing us by. And so that's another really interesting upside of fun and novelty, because it can, it's a pattern stop. And so once we start to create those memories, that's how new neural pathways start to get developed anyways. So we know fun is a great sort of useful tool for creating neuroplasticity, because what doesn't happen is if we are living our lives in a habituated way, the way that I like to think about it, one of the neuroscientists that I interviewed for the book, it's like, if you had 100 copies of The Fun Habit, right? Would you keep all 100 on your shelf, or would you throw away 99 and go, oh yeah, I remember at one point I had 100 copies? And that's the same thing we do with our experiences, right? Like if you're, a lawyer and you're going in every day and it's kind of rinse and repeat, you're like, yeah, I went to work this year. And that's the memory you store, right? So figuring out ways, whether it's through fun or any other mechanism, to create some novelty, and hopefully it is enjoyable novelty, really is important for a whole host of reasons. Because one, it breaks that cycle, but then two, to circle back to identity, then you remind yourself that you have the agency to build a life that you want. And so whether that's a joyful one or one that's rooted in purpose or whatever is valuable to you, then you can refocus on that and push yourself forward rather than, again, being trapped in a routine.
We need to now have a conversation about time dilation, because this is disturbing. Okay? Because what I'm hearing is that because we hear so many people say, man, time is going faster. And we understand that often comes with just age perception. But what you've introduced is that a lot of times time just slips away because we don't have any deviation or meaningful deviation from the routine. So you look back on one year, it's like, what did you do? It's like, I took care of my family and went to work. So you did two things, like that's it. And so sometimes, so what you're saying is that sometimes it seems like time is slipping away because we're not injecting enough fun for us to slow down and enjoy and experience life?
That's exactly right. And at a physiological level, I think maybe a better analogy than the book one is,
if you're leading a lot of meetings, or if you're in meetings back to back all day, you know how mentally demanding that can be. You're trying to stay present, you're contributing, you're thinking strategically, but part of your brain is also tracking action items, decisions, and follow-ups. That's why our team uses Granola. Granola is an AI-powered notepad built for the way real people actually meet. Here's how it works. You take rough notes like you normally would, and in the background, Granola securely transcribes the meeting, and when it ends, it turns everything into clean, structured notes that are actually useful. And what I appreciate the most is that it works through your device's audio. It integrates seamlessly into the video conferencing tools that you already use, and there's no complicated setup. It just fits into your workflow. Granola doesn't replace you in the meeting, it augments you. It lets you lean in, focus, and listen deeply while still walking away knowing exactly what was deciding, who owns what, and what comes next. Before Granola, our team would spend extra time cleaning up notes and double-checking details. Now, we leave meetings aligned and clear. It saved us time and helps us to operate at a much higher level. If meetings are eating up your day, Granola is a no-brainer. You can actually try it completely free for 3 months. Just head to granola.ai/Kwame. That's granola.ai/Kwame to get your time back. Get 3 months free at granola.ai/Kwame.
Each memory is a piece of tape, right? Like if you're old enough to remember VHS cassettes, right? Like as we're learning new things, it doesn't, if you've stuck around by now, hopefully you're a believer in fun. But if you don't want to believe in fun, let's just talk about growth, learning, whatever your jam is, as long as it's something that breaks you out of that habitual behavior. Like each one of those things, you learn a new thing, you have an enjoyable experience with your family that you want to remember, right? You're extending that tape. And so that is the best way, because if you look back at the tapestry of your life, now you have all these things stored in your brain. You've created the scaffolding of neural pathways. We know, and this comes from brain science, this isn't just conjecture, that the folks that have lived a habituated life, they don't have that gray matter. They haven't created any memories, right? Because they haven't needed to. And so, how do you do those things? And in a previous life, when Lumosity and Happy Neuron were things, I was helping some of those companies go to market. And so we thought that, like something as simple as playing a game could really help. We now understand that specificity kind of just stays. So just, like Sudoku has its place, but if that's all you do, again, you're not building too much more, right? You're just getting better at that one thing. But it's as simple as like going and engaging people with different perspectives. It's, again, mastering different skills and having a corpus of things that you're interested in. But my argument and what I say is that we should, create those memories with loved ones as well. I think those those become the richest things that we look back at. This is somewhat standing on the shoulders of broaden and build theory from Barbara Fredrickson. But as we broaden and build our knowledge base and our connection with others and feel, that we are a part of something bigger, again, whether that's a thing or people, we know that builds, resilience and also builds cognitive reserve.
We have to be really aware of the time concessions that we give to in our work. So, for instance, our boss can say, "Hey, can you do this little thing?" But little, and then another thing, then it is a big thing. Now, to put an example, Kwame is fully booked for the next 3 months, fully booked, and I receive 3 emails per day saying, "Hey, can I have a small chat with Kwame just in the next month?" And I could do it for one person, but then I'll give more and more concessions, and then Kwame will be fully burned out, and no one will care. So I have to say no and no and no and no and no. And for many people, it's like, "Oh my God, but it's just 10 minutes. I just need 30 minutes." But it's like taking care of ourselves, right? It's like not being aware of what we sign or what we agree on, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the folks that I see doing it the best are the ones that understand, that play it forward, that every yes is saying no to other things. And when you look at it through that frame, right, it becomes really helpful. And if you're an empathetic person, it can get tough. Because, some folks are just selfish and they're, so you might get, folks that want to dump that on you, their attention, because, they have all the time in the world to give. And the fact that, so they devalue what time is, right? And that's just part of leveling up, I think, is understanding the worth of time and, providing ways that maybe you can scale that type of opportunity. I've seen creators, create, these are my office hours. I'll be here. If you want to ask me questions, I'll give away 1 or 2 hours a week. Right. Or excuse me, a month, a week. So I don't recommend anyone giving away 2 hours a week. But, so there are ways to scale that, but you're exactly right. And I think what I would fall back on is what I originally said. And that for every yes, it means you're saying no to other things. And the folks that really fundamentally understand that, preserve their ability to engage in effective choice architecture.
I think that the perfect argument for negotiation, you gave me the perfect argument, because before the interview, I thought like something like, "Oh, it's easy for him because he's not looking out for my money." But actually, you're looking out for my money in the long term, right? So if we are asked something, we can say, "Hey, I cannot do it because I need to work for you. I need to do it. I need to perform better for you. So if you put more and more things on my plate, I will decrease, and that will affect you in the long term," right?
That's absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's important too, because at the end of the day, one thing that I've recognized, and this is a bit of a negative orientation, but I've recognized it has a positive influence in my perception of it, is that people are going to be disappointed, and you need to pick your disappointment, right? It has to be distributed in the appropriate ways. And so you could either say no to somebody, set a boundary, they're going to experience disappointment, which is not necessarily negative in the sense that you did something wrong. It will have a negative impact. Now it's up to them to, engage in emotional intelligence and emotion management, and in common parlance, get over it. And the other thing is too, the alternative is I choose not to disappoint them because I'm more concerned about their well-being than mine. And so in order to do what they want me to do, I end up disappointing myself. And a lot of times people who struggle in conflict, who are unwilling to set those boundaries, they just sit there consistently disappointing themselves while making everybody else happy at their own expense. And so when you think about disappointment as something that needs to be equitably distributed, you have to recognize that it can't always be you bearing the burden of disappointment.
Yeah. And I think to pair it with, a construct that I like to play with, it's what are you comparing that to, right? Like, so, and maybe more broadly, like, are you in the same chapter or period of life that this particular person is? Because I think one of the things that is difficult is that, and especially now with the polarization of ideology, is we have to pick a side, right? And yet so many of these things kind of fall, within like a spectrum when we look at choice architecture. And so what do I mean by that? It's like this person's stage in life, and again, going back to Simone's example, they probably don't value time in a way that you see your time because they don't know your life, right? And so for you, what you're giving away is you understand it because you're the hero of your story, right? But like they don't get it because no one is the hero of someone else's story, right? And so they're just thinking like, well, it would be so easy for me to give away 30 minutes, right? In negotiations, we talk about BATNA, right? So this particular person's BATNA is probably all screwed up. And to your point, that's not your fault, right? So yeah, you disappointed them. Que sera would be my attitude about that. But another thing I think that's important, that's like adjacent to this, whether you're looking at scientific studies or you're just trying to evaluate someone's life, right? I was having this conversation early on, I think it was before I wrote the book, with Noah Kagan. He's the creator of AppSumo. So big grinder. He's known for being like one of the first at Mint and Facebook. And so, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and, so I wasn't giving nuance to a lot of my ideas back then. I'm like, bro, like, how do you, like say that working 80, 90 hours a week in your 20s was like fabulous? I mean, you must have been burnt out. And he's like, Mike, remember, it was my early 20s and we were in Silicon Valley. Like, I was having so much fun with these guys, so yeah, it was 80 hours a week, but probably 50 of it was play because we were doing like hackathons so I realized I wasn't putting myself empathetically in his shoes. In that period of his life, working 90 hours a week was absolutely the right recipe, right? Because look at like what it allowed him to level up later. Should that be what he's doing now? Absolutely not. And he'll tell you the same, right? But like, so understanding that context. So in your example, Simone, it's the context of him not understanding, the worth. And then in Noah's, where he challenged me, it was me not understanding that in that stage of life, in his early 20s, that was the fun. He wasn't burning out. That's exactly where he wanted to be.
See, this is fascinating because we as children, fun is simple and easy, but it's interesting because it gets much more complex as we get older. And I remember I was talking to one of my friends, Dory Clark. She was on the podcast.
Oh, I love Dory.
Oh, she's great. And we had a little bit of a breakthrough moment. It turned into a microtherapy session.
There you go.
Where she was talking about how you want to integrate fun into what you do. And she asked, what do you do for fun? I said, well, I work out in the morning. I have a nice little gym community. And then I enjoy spending time with my family too. And she said, that sounds great. I do not doubt that those are enjoyable, but it sounds like both of those are really associated with some level of productivity too. And so is there anything you do just purely for the fun of it? And I was like, oh my gosh, have I become a boring person and not even realized it? And I think it's important for us to, again, kind of end where we began with the definition of fun, because it's what is fun for one person might not be fun for another person. And like with that example that you just gave, what is fun for you at one stage of life may cease to be fun for you at a different stage of life. So it feels like sometimes we're hitting a moving target. So when we're thinking about fun, but also authentic fun versus performative fun, where with performative fun, we're trying to be like other people and have fun, like the Instagram people clicking their heels on the beach. If that's not your thing, would you try to be like them? How can we be authentically, have authentic fun and figure out what that really means for us?
Yeah, well, since I know Dory, I'd respectfully push back on that a little bit, although I know what it's rooted in. Because that is, and again, as academics, we have to nuance everything. So some of this is just semantics and the fact that I do believe in the research. But what I would separate from her is more play versus fun. So fun in the most academic context is just, are you in a positive valent state, right? And so the way we describe that, and let me just say that valent is just a fancy word for experiencing pleasure, right? And so for me to be able to do my work, I'm just simply describing fun as, Are you deriving pleasure in the things that you're doing? Or is it an unpleasant act that's going to deplete you that if you were given the choice, you wouldn't do? So I would say if I was in that conversation with the two of you, I don't necessarily see anything wrong. Like if it's a respite for you, and you're enjoying the time with your friends, but there happens to be an outcome, then you're still having fun and you're still going to benefit from the things that we talked about, the hedonic flexibility principle. Is there benefits to play? And play, the nuance there, right, is that you're enjoying yourself, but it's not bound to an outcome. So at the end of the hour, right, there's nothing you're going to look back on and decide whether or not that was a successful hour used. Are there benefits to that too? Absolutely. But is it something that you need to overly worry about as long as you're enjoying yourself? I don't know. I think it is a good question to ask. So I don't fault her for going, hey, have you given this some thought? Like, is there something that you're doing where there isn't an outcome tied to it? Because yeah, I'm not going to argue with her that there isn't huge benefits to that. And again, going back to some of Cleese's work, we also know putting yourself in that state does tend to lend itself to nonlinear thinking, which has its own benefits. But as regards to like, how are you dividing up your day? If you're enjoying those times, then we know that the energy is generally accretive, right? It's when you're like, an example I often use, I was working with someone who couldn't understand why they just used to love going to a Tastmasters group, and like now they're like, I hate it. And it was as simple as just examining what had happened in that environment. And what had happened was the folks that he used to like to go to this group with had all traded out. So now he just didn't really like the folks or didn't have a connection to them, right? So it was no longer a good use of time, even though he wanted to become a better speaker. So we got him in a group that was like more improv focused, and he's like, I like it again. So in that construct, like just to finish the thought, there's generally three things to look at whether or not you're actually enjoying your times. It's the people that you're with, the actual activity, like is it something that's just, falling out of flavor, or the environment, right? Like, back to your exercise example, one of the most provocative things I put in the book, especially because I came up through health clubs, was, one of the things that I find really interesting is oftentimes folks will, because they're so conditioned to believe that exercise has to happen in the four clubs of a health club, similar to what we were talking about with regards to fun needing a rebrand, like I just must not like exercise. And that subtle nudge of like, hey, hiking in nature is exercise too. Like if that's your jam, don't think it has to happen within these four walls. And you check in with them and they're like, oh yeah, I guess I love exercise now, because all they wanted, they wanted to be in nature and listen to their favorite podcast that like distracts them from the fact that they're taking a long walk. And now they're off to the races. And now they are creating a healthy habit that would have never occurred in the wrong environment, because they just, for whatever reason, they felt intimidated by the other members, or it wasn't their jam, or they didn't like the music. And that was just enough friction to not create that healthy habit. So anyways, sorry, I know I took a couple of twists and turns there.
No, if you have more twists and or turns, please add them to your answers. This is great. You've given me a lot to think about, and I like this distinction. It's very helpful, and I like the three parts too: the people, the activity, the environment. Sometimes it could be just one of the three, but it seems like you could the more the merrier when it comes to these activities.
It's funny, the activity one, right? Especially for work. I've been fascinated at how successful it is when someone just approaches something that they feel like they should like, but they don't, and look at it outside themselves, almost like an anthropologist, right? Like, what is it about this thing? So they can evaluate, they get out of doing it themselves. And they're like, what is it about this that's gone wrong? Or picking it apart task by task and then reassembling it in a way that is meaningful or pleasurable to them, and all of a sudden they like it again, right? And so I just been surprised at the amount of times, it's not the thing itself, it's how you were going about it.
Well, let's stick on that point too, because I'm thinking about times where I might not have enjoyed a task, but then I thought about how I could make it more enjoyable. Now it is something that I enjoy doing. Like one of the things that I push my son to do, the one who is sentient, the 4-year-old, he's not, he has his moments, but There's a little aside. Dominic said something somewhat profound last night. I forget what it was. And so I said, Dominic, what does thinking mean? And his response was, a bit, a bit, a bit, a bit, a bit. I was like, oh, he's not there. He's not there. I will revisit this conversation in a year. but with Kai.
Maybe he's right and we're all wrong, right?
maybe we're the wrong ones. But when I was talking to Kai, I would tell him to do something, like maybe some kind of chore or something. I don't call them chores, but just helping the family, whatever it happens to be, clean up this thing up, do the dishes, and I'll see his shoulders slump and his head down, and I say, okay, cool. Now we have another thing. So not only do I want you to do this, I want you to tell me how you made it fun. Tell me how you made this activity enjoyable. And I have been blown away at how much fun he can have while cleaning up the house, right? It's like, hey, there's a race. I'm going to play this song. I'm going to play it loud. Let's see how much of this room you can clean up by the time the song's done. And then they just go and race around and clean. And so I'm wondering about when it comes to play and fun and the day-to-day things that we have to do, what approach can we use to start to intentionally inject some fun, enjoyment, and levity into the things that we are perceiving as chores?
Yeah. So generally it doesn't take much, right? Again, this study is going to sound trite, but I think it highlights how powerful simple interventions can be. It comes from Katie Milkman. And so she was looking at this idea of temptation bundling that was brought forth, like James Clear talks about it in Atomic Habits as well. So a lot of folks are familiar with it. But so she took that concept, she was working with 24-hour fitness, and she found participants that really liked particular podcasts, right? Like, so they were zealots of, the media that they like to consume. And she said, I want you to only, you're going to have this social contract. You can only engage in this when you get to the club and engage in cardio, right? Oh. And so, again, because we're getting towards the end, should be no surprise, all the magic happened, right? One, they liked going to the gym better because now they associate it with this thing that they liked. They forgot that they were exercising. So again, similar to that hike analogy, right? It's like, no, I'm now engrossed in this podcast I've been waiting to listen to. So I've forgotten that I'm on a treadmill. And so you see engagement in this activity that that's good for you, but if it was boring before, or quote unquote not fun, you wouldn't engage in as long. But I think the most fun thing, and you see this, like some of the other studies are kind of silly, like the one that's often brought up, Dr. Dunn did one where she held chocolate from chocolate lovers, and so we know that chocolate lovers will like the chocolate a lot more if you've deprived them of it. Example I playfully talk about in the book is the Eddie Murphy bit about the saltine cracker. Do you remember that one?
No, I got something to Google.
Yeah, no. But it should be, so the third part of that study is they actually like the podcast better. Like, so even if they already liked them before, because they were now, there was a level of scarcity for the thing that they liked. So you get this trifecta of benefits, right? You enjoy exercise a little bit more because now you're looking forward to the thing that you like. You're engaging in something that you might have not done as long. So it doesn't have to be exercise. It could be a domestic chore, right? Like house cleaning, and you see that all the time, parents that are good at this reframe. Like, how do we turn this into a game? I just outfitted my son with a leaf blower, and he forgot that he's actually cleaning up the leaves because he just is like, wait, you're giving me this big machine that does crazy things. So there's all sorts of ways to do that. But I think the most profound thing is then you actually make this thing that you liked even more enjoyable. And again, it doesn't take much, right? We're talking about a podcast. We're talking about, music. For me, it's comedy shows. I just love comedy. So that's my jam. Oh, but let me be careful because I have had to add this big asterisk to it because some studies have come out after the book. You can't whimsically add things to what I call agonizing. So if it's something like you have a big legal brief or you're trying to get through your taxes, it actually backfires where like now you hate that thing even more. You got no enjoyment. And at its worst, if you keep trying, you'll actually then start to learn to hate the thing that you liked before. So it needs to be a task that's fairly low on the cognitive load,
Yes. Oh, that's good. That is good. So I hope nobody is listening to this episode while
Buyer
doing
beware.
taxes. This is great. Mike, man, I appreciate you. This is so helpful. And I love that we have been able to take something that can feel so whimsical and ephemeral and brought some a tangible nature to it that makes it achievable. So I appreciate this. And before you go, can you just remind the listeners again about the book and how they can get in touch?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So the book is The Fun Habit. It's out, wherever you enjoy purchasing books. And then I write about the science of fun for Psychology Today, but you can find, links to all of my content at michaelrucker.com.
Amazing. Mike, thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.